I'm not well still. I'm better than I was last night, but I think I'm just going to stay over here just in case I cough on you or anything. I'll try and put a barrier between us. Also, my voice hurts, so I'm going to try not to talk over you. Thank you. So last night, while I was feeling sick and terrible, at some point the internet swallowed its homework or something or other. Dog ate my internet, and I was just rabbiting on for ages. I was sharing the gold. There was so much wisdom in the bit that didn't get in the recording and didn't get into the... Say hi from me. My throat feels better. I'm not sure that my biggest problem at the moment is I can't hear anything. So my big boomy voice inside my head sounds even more annoying to me than it does to you. So what can I do? Yeah, anyway, I rabbited on. Rabbited said all sorts of great stuff. Nobody but me and my dog heard it. And then I realised that I was alone, and subsequently came back in via my phone into Zoom because my whole computer was completely cactus. So we kind of called it a day. So I'm going to continue where I left off. So those of you who weren't at the shoot or haven't since seen the recording, which I'd be very surprised if you had, because I only managed to get it uploaded at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, and then only in OUA. It hasn't actually gone into face-to-face yet, so it's only if you're stalking me on YouTube that you would have seen it. So there are a couple of things, just a couple of key points I want to make. I have previously sent a link to a video where I did it as a desk lecture, this feed forward. There's just one key difference that I want to point out, and then I'll go through the other details. So this slide is important. Sorry, I'm just about to close the door on Aisha, which, you know, sort of limiting my ability to get a good teaching score when I slam the door in people's faces. The thing I really want to point out to you in this slide is that word. Your client has specifically asked you for a checklist. Your client didn't ask you for a checklist, clearly, okay? And that's what I would have said on the desk recording, and that's why I haven't given you or said that you should only use the desk recording. So in the past, it was the customer, the client, who has always asked, this all seems really problematic, what could I have done differently? Give me a checklist of the kind of things that I should probably have in an agreement of this type. For a range of reasons, I decided to swap that up this time, and then I had forgotten that I didn't use the word checklist in the instructions. And of course everything else talks about the checklist. So in your instructions, you will see at the end, after the email from Claire, which is an email from Claire, not from Harvey, but from Claire, the email from Claire, after that, it says, please make sure you do these things, at least 7 or 8 things. And one of them is, think about Dennis's precedent document and give some advice about how you would change it. So that's the equivalent of the checklist, and doing it as a checklist is a really good idea because, as I said a couple of times last week, I do not want you to redraft the document. Okay, that is not the task, and if you try and do that, you will do it badly. I don't mean to be rude, you're all very clever, and in fact you're one of the brightest groups I've ever had, but you will definitely do it badly, and then I will tell you how badly you do it, and there'll be lots of red pen, and you will be sad, and I will be anxious, and yeah, so just don't do that, okay? What you need to do is think about what needs to be different and find a way to communicate that. So, before I even get into that part, I want to talk about the word precedent. So, you're law students, and you use the word precedent more in the last, well, since you started, for some of you in the last 8 weeks, for some of you in the last 40 weeks. You've used the word precedent more often than you have ever used it before. And you have used it to mean some judge-made law, usually. Except for those of you who are in a law firm, where the word precedent is used on a daily basis to mean something that got written before that we can use again. So precedents in law firms could be really sophisticated. They could be automated document tools these days where all you're doing is putting in the variables and out pops a letter and a contract and all sorts of things. Anna's nodding her head. She works in conveyancing. These days you might never see the contract. Mohammed's not here yet, but he works in property development and as a builder. He just goes into his HIA portal and he puts in the words and out come the building contract at the other end. He doesn't have to read the substance of it because that's a sophisticated precedent. In other cases, and looking at Dennis's document, this might be the way that he works, is firms might just hold on to things that they've done before so they can change the names later for similar sorts of arrangements. And there's varying lots of complexity and sophistication in between. So when we talk about Dennis's precedent here, we are not talking about that time he went to the High Court in the castle. We are talking about the document that he used to create his first draft. And that first draft has 2 lots of font in it. One lot is the precedent, the document where Dennis just put in the names and a price. It tells you in the facts what he put in. And then somebody else hand wrote some other changes into it. And that's got I would have handwritten it for you, but just in case you couldn't read my writing, I used a hand-writey font when I made it. So your job so the checklist component in these instructions relates to that part of the task. Now that part of the task looks deceptively simple, but it's possibly the hardest thing in the whole process. It requires you to work out what's good or bad about the document that Dennis has put on the table. It requires you to go and have a look at the Encyclopedia of Forms and Precedents and look at some other example documents and think about how they might be similar or different to what Basil's put on the table. It also requires you to think about what it is that the client is trying to achieve and what the legal issues are that in a future transaction you might want to avoid. And so I don't want you to redraft it. I want you to tell me what changes you would make. Doing that as a checklist could be a really good way of doing it. So, Dennis, in future deals of this type, when we're trying to achieve a blah, 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 then I would suggest that we always make sure that the document includes blah, 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 blah. You might want to, well, particularly if you want good marks, you might want to tell him why in relation to each of those. You might need to thread it through your document. I don't care. I'm trying to give you breadth. Checklist is just one of the ways that you can do it. And one of the reasons that I'll be frank, that I've taken the word checklist out when I did it, and I should have done it with the instructions, so I apologise in relation to that to anyone I'm confused. But the reason I took it out is because I've had very similar assignments, not factually and not issues-wise, but structurally for a little while. And so there are just so many checklists floating around from past students. They were getting a bit boring last time, to be quite frank, and a number of them may or may not have looked way more similar to ones I'd seen before than I cared to inquire about. So, and I know that it's all about your learning, but part of it is about me being able to stay awake when I'm reading them as well. So any questions, concerns, frustrations about that? Aisha. Sorry, you're going to have to speak much louder because I'm basically deaf today. So, I'm unwell.
You said what changes will you make to Dennis's document? Do you mean the draft where they have
well, when you have a look at it, you can see which bits Dennis drafted and which bits were handwritten. You are told quite specifically in the instructions what he did with his precedent. So with his precedent, he just added names and the price couple of other things I can't remember off the top of my head. So you work out what the precedent is and you suggest what changes need to be made. I will not penalise you terribly if you decide to say these are the things that should have been in the draft that you sent to the client or to the other side. You might have some views into whether he should have sent it to the client first. It's complete, all of that stuff. It's a much more complex assignment than last time. Okay? Sarisha.
Just adding on to what you just
Big loud voice.
Following on from what you just said, like the sentence before, if we find that there are things in the agreement that has been sent that might potentially need to be changed, do we just assume that that document has been sent and whatever advice we are providing to Dennis is basically for future drafts? Not
That's why I've said for future, because the thing is you have to come to a view as to whether there is a contract or not. If there is no contract, I'll give you this one for free, chances are you can continue negotiating and you can change it. If you have a contract, maybe, well, I don't know, you tell me, okay? So I'm not going to give you a legal position. And probably just for what it's worth, the last piece of add-on advice from the final assignments from last time, one of the things that I may not have included in the feedback I'd given everyone is there are a few people, not a lot, but a few, who confuse the idea of an assumption that you express in a letter with a legal conclusion. So, and that's partly because you're new to this and you're thinking, well, I assume the law works this way, so that must be an assumption. Where actually it's a difference between an assumption and a legal conclusion. So think about that. So some of the things we're talking about now would require me to draw a legal conclusion, and I'm not gonna do that. Yeah, what's going on? Okay, so I'm going to just scoot through this stuff really quickly now. This is where we got to last night. I will point out, I've had a few questions about, in this slide pack, I've got these words, real world advice, real world good practice. Does that mean that you don't have to do this in the assignment? Do it if it's helpful. If it's awkward and it doesn't make sense, don't do it. You're the one who has to make a decision about what's the best way to communicate to your audience. And sorry about that, it's just so noisy, I just had to close it. So do it if it makes sense. If you can't do it without giving your reader a hernia, don't do it, okay? I'm really just trying to make you as good a practitioner as you can. And the thing is actually going through, I put this slide pack together a couple of years ago now and did a pretty extensive review of it probably 2 years ago. And even now, as I was sort of looking at it, I'm thinking next semester I'm going to focus a little bit more on, well, a lot of this stuff, we are just seeing fewer and fewer letters in the profession anyway. So people are writing an email using the same kind of things as we're talking about here as a letter, but the number of things that, and maybe I'm just being a little bit churlish here when I'm saying, well, a letter to me is something that you would print out, fold into 3, put it into a DL envelope and post it somewhere. And that's just not happening. And so probably 18 months ago even, you would write the letter and then you would save it to PDF and attach it to an email. But I think even in the last 18 months, we're seeing more and more, people don't want to be, they're reading things on their phone. They don't want to hit an attachment. They want to read it in real life. So even though what I'm saying here about writing a letter, the substance of it isn't true, but the medium is less and less paper, more and more online. And because people read in these devices, and everybody's device is set up differently with different size fonts. You know, I've got old lady eye font on mine. Some of you will have tiny, I don't want my mother to read over my shoulder font, and there'll be something in between. But the thing is, the bigger the font, the more swipes someone has, and the more confusing things can get. So on a piece of paper, a table works really well. But if you put a table in an email and you're reading it then on a phone, it gets squashed off differently. So there's subtle things, but we do have to think about our reader all the time. One of the things I often see in assignments is people addressing letters to the wrong person, and that's just attention to detail stuff. But the problem is, what's actually happening is your mind is 100% in the problem and you're doing the best job you can, and so little things like spelling the client's name correctly or addressing it to the wrong person, they just feel like little silly things to you. But if you're reading it, if I'm the client, and this happens to me all the time, and I know that I get the psychology of it, as soon as I get a letter that's addressed to somebody, some other Catherine, spelt differently from me, I'm like, firstly a little bit cranky because I don't feel like I've been paid attention to, especially when I get them Kathy with a K. It's like Kathy, like she's some 14-year-old girl from my past. Kathy with a K, and then I'll go through, and so I'm a little bit cranky, I don't mean to be, but then I'm looking for other errors. I'm expecting errors, which is a silly thing, but that's how the psychology works. Again, look, a lot of this is structural, and I want to fly through this stuff. A lot of these principles are things that I've spoken about. One of the criteria for this assignment is, have you taken the needs of your various audiences in mind? What your client needs is quite different from what your lawyer boss needs. So I really want you to think about that. Again, the pack will be useful to you on some of the rules about language. When I say rules, that's in inverted commas. You will not go to jail if you break these so-and-so rules. I had an email exchange with somebody today where to make my point, I actually sent them Justice Kirby's 10 rules of, I call them the 10 commandments of writing. Enjoyed those. It was like I will share them with the group. But at the end of the day, I think if Justice Kirby can write in plain English, we can too. And so take a look at how those things work. This is basically my mind map of when you need to cite or put a reference in. So start with, have you made is there a quotation from somebody else's work? If there is, cite it, okay? We don't have any problems with that. Think about what the rules are. I made this slide before, AGLC 4 used to be 3 lines of text, now it's 4. Goodness knows, but think about that. Okay, if it's not a direct quote, have you paraphrased somebody else's work if you have acknowledged the source? Firstly, academic integrity. Secondly, it actually makes you look clever if you are paraphrasing somebody who is worth listening to. If you are writing to a client and you are paraphrasing work or words that have come from another law firm's website and they find that out, you will look like an idiot. And that's actually because you are an idiot. That is a really, really stupid thing to do. Turnitin will find it for me as well, so I will know if it's come from a law firm website. Law firm websites are a great place to find information. In many ways, particularly in areas where there's not a lot of litigation, they're better than most places because practitioners are actually doing that stuff. And that's why they tell the world about what they do. But they are not peer-reviewed sources for academic purposes. So if you find the need, if you find something online which is delivered by a law firm, which looks like it's great and interesting, by all means, use it, but try and verify it. Do the research. Is it supported by cases? Chances are, if that law firm has acted in the case, they will be telling you what the case is. They might be telling you what the cases are anyway on their sites. But also have a look and see if there's any academics who share that view. Look for secondary sources as well. If you've summarised, if you haven't paraphrased but you've summarised, same thing. And if you've used the ideas in some other ways, same thing. If your answer to all of those things is no, 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 I don't need to cite this, another thing you need to think about is actually, is this academically robust? Have I actually thought about this? It is actually a good thing for you to be able to demonstrate that you have done the research and that your opinion is supported by somebody else's opinion or is grounded in someone else's opinion. What is a great thing, the stuff that HDs are made of, is for you to find two academics or two judgments that have completely different points of view, discuss them both and have your own opinion on which is the best. Because then you're doing everything. You're showing the research, you're teasing out the complexity and the ideas, and you're showing me that you're able to do critical analysis. Questions, concerns, frustrations, or immediate desire to run to the library? Any of those? Yeah, sorry, many more language rules in here. Let's talk about citations in the letter. Okay, so you've got a difficult thing here. One of the things that you need to do is write a letter, emulate real world practice. In the real world, your client does not care about the law, they just want the answer to their question. So if you're telling them that something is right or wrong, that a court will or won't uphold a document, you need to, any statement of the law, you need to support it with a citation. So what your task is this time is you're going to give a draft to Dennis and you're going to support that draft with a memo that effectively tells him this is why you can be confident that you can just print this letter, sign it and send it to the client. So you've got to think about how you're going to deal with the citation problem. A couple of ways I've seen it done successfully. One is, well, I don't know if I call this successful, don't refer to the law at all in the letter. It's limiting, but you do not have a citation problem. Secondly, write about what the law is. Don't get yourself too caught up in the cases or the legislation unless they're directly and specifically relevant. And to the extent that you're talking about what the law is, signpost to Dennis that it's supported by actual law. Now, you might do that by putting footnotes in the letter or using those little comment features you can get in Word or other things, putting a little text box. I've seen people put like a table where they've got the letter down one side and on the other side they've got their citations for it. And then they just say, once you're happy with it, Dennis, I'll reformat it as a letter. Think about how you're going to do it because you're presenting a draft, okay? The third way is ignore the citations in the letter altogether. Again, some risks here, but be really specific in the memo, which paragraph, which points relate to which citations, how you're supporting them. Now, frankly, I find the up and down, up and down, up and down annoying to read, and I reckon my concentration span is probably better than Dennis Tenuto's, though not necessarily today. So think about Dennis as well. Because, okay, the letter, you need to be able to present that in a particular way, but Dennis needs to sign off on this. So if Dennis has to clear out the boardroom table, lay out every piece of paper in your advice and keep going backwards and forwards to check it off, he's thinking that's not straight to the pool room. So think about how, I'm mixing my characters up. That's not good. Questions, concerns? Think about a good way to do it. Oh, what's going on here? If your client is not a lawyer, the inclusion of many references to cases and legislation may not be useful to them. You will need to acknowledge your sources. You can do this in the memo using signposting, including footnotes that you might suggest are removed after the letter is finalised, or in any way that balances your need to reference. Academic integrity, showing your boss that you didn't simply pull the idea out of the Paduta textbook and ensuring that the letter is useful to your client. That is a direct quote from me because I am the chairman of the Paduta Institute and I can pull stuff directly out of, yes, thin air, as opposed to the Paduma, which might be my ass, but I can't say that to you. Oh, I did. Conclusions, particularly in a letter, you need to end up with what happens next, okay? You need to, when you close the letter, that is where your client will be expecting. What do they do next? What do they have to do? If you've got a number of reasons why you've ended up with the end result you have, you don't need to restate them all. Give the key one. This is not the place to create a new reason, to come up with a new one, okay? Just don't, I want synthesised information, summarised and synthesised information in that last paragraph, not anything new. Also, think about whether the conclusions are useful to your client. Think about, like, again, I see this less and less. I think you might do some stuff about this in intro now as well. But I used to get lots of letters that were, let's go straight to court. Do not pass mediation. Do not collect your senses along the way. No, I think that's enough from me. Oh, except for my little list. This is a list that will help you. It is a list of alternative words that you can use rather than the fancy ones that somehow, I don't know, you walk into your law degree and you get impregnated with words like aforementioned and imminent and penultimate, and just say what you mean what you say, make sure your client understands. Much, much easier to avoid being sued if your client actually understands what you're writing to them. And ultimately, plain language is about risk reduction as much as anything, and that's what lawyers, contract lawyers in particular, are about. As contract lawyers, when we write contracts, we're about allocating risk between the parties in the right way. So part of what we need to do as practitioners is also allocate our risk. So if we don't understand something, particularly about the facts, we need to say so. If you as a junior lawyer don't understand something in the real world, you need to hunt down that boss and say, I need more. Because that's why you're being supervised, because there is a risk. The risk of pretending that you know it all, particularly when you hide it in dense language that nobody can understand, just increases the risk of the letter. Okay, there are other slides in that pack. I think I've made the key points that I want to make, and we've got quite a bit to do. I'm going to swap slide packs.